This is episode number 160. We're halfway through the year. Most people forgot their resolutions long ago. If you did, I'm going to show you how to get back on track.
This is the Red Podcast. How to take your idea and make a name for yourself within your industry and beyond. Spread your message. Attract a following. Rise above the noise. Here's your host, David Hooper.
Holy moly. Feel like a fat guy on January 1st who hasn't seen the inside of a gym since he was in high school. Feel a little out of shape getting back here in the Red Room. That's why this episode is about getting back on track. I'm doing it myself. I've got some thoughts to help you get back on track. This episode's going to have a little T&A in it. Transparency and authenticity. I'm going to share my experience launching the all-new Red Podcast, which I've been doing for the last 6 weeks, hoping that if you've fallen short on your goals, if you feel like you're not where you want to be, you will be able to get back on track. This is the Red Podcast, the podcast for influencers. What's an influencer? Well, if you've got a message to spread, if you're a blogger, podcaster, speaker, marketer, maybe a nonfiction author, an entrepreneur, this is the podcast for you. And the focus is how to take your idea, make a name for yourself, and make money. Backstory on this, 6 weeks ago, if you listen to special episode 10, you can get that at redpodcast.com/SE10 to hear the very last episode that I did with my co-host Laurel. We decided to part ways for a little while. She's working on some other projects, and broadcasting, that's really my wheelhouse. So that was our announcement 6 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, came back with episode number 154 for the all-new Red Podcast. That's what you're listening to right now. redpodcast.com/154 to hear the very first episode with the new format, which focuses more on influencers than our previous incarnation. The first 150 episodes, that was really about building a foundation of entrepreneurship. It's a lot of mindset stuff. The new format is focusing more on how to spread your message. As I mentioned earlier, take your idea, make a name for yourself, and make money. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback. The last 4 weeks have been fantastic. You've been sending me tweets, emails. It's really felt great. I'm excited about it. It's a better match for me. It's an opportunity for me to get better. These solo podcasts, I don't have a lot of experience with them. I've got over 10 years in broadcast radio. I've done hundreds of interviews. If you added everything up, certainly 500 episodes. But when it comes to the solo podcast, just me talking to you directly, no guest, no music, no interviews, I'm a little bit rougher on that, and this format is an opportunity for me to get better, spreading my knowledge just from me to you. It's also easier to schedule with just one person. That's great. I've got more control. I put it out whenever I want, but there's a flip side of that, and that's what I'm going to talk about. The plan with the new Red Podcast, Red 2.0, was to release 2 weekly episodes, but the reality is just a little bit off. I'll be going deeper into that, why that happened, and hopefully it's something that you can learn from so your big plans don't get derailed like the Red Podcast 2.0 has so far. To break it down, here's what happened. I underestimated the transition. Specifically, I underestimated how comfortable I was with Red Podcast 1.0. The way that worked, Laurel and I would get together twice a week. We would do what I call a gang run. We would tape 2 to 3 episodes at once. We'd do that twice a week, and I was comfortable. We had a system in place. I knew when I needed to outline the episodes. I knew when I needed to edit, get everything online to release them Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But that system became a well-worn groove. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this. You probably have if you're like me and you get systems in place and then you execute. Sometimes you get that groove so deep that it's tough to jump out of it. That groove becomes so ingrained in your life that it's difficult to do something else. On paper, this looks great. 3 episodes to 2 episodes, you would think that would be easier, but keep in mind that I'm doing 100% of the work. I've got nobody to bounce off of. It's just me, a mic, hit record, start talking. I'm not that comfortable with it, and I don't have that groove like I did when I had a co-host. You've probably seen the television show called The Simpsons. It's the longest running primetime show ever. It's been on, I think, about 25 years. And this is a great example because so many people are familiar with it, but also because the show is animated. If you go back and you look at the first couple of seasons of The Simpsons, or even before then, when The Simpsons were just a short on the Tracy Ullman Show, which was a short-lived show on Fox, you can see that what The Simpsons, the characters in the show, look like now, completely different from what they looked like early on. How they act, completely different. How they interact with each other, completely different. This is character development. Another long-running Fox show, Married with Children, you look at the first season of that, how the characters acted. Kelly Bundy, kind of a ditz at the end of the series. Well, she was smart, pretty witty at the beginning. Star Trek is another one that you've probably seen, but you may not have seen this unless you've seen the Star Trek pilot. Spock, Vulcan, shows no emotion. Well, he did in the pilot episode. It's character development, and that's basically what I'm doing now with the new podcast. I've got kind of an outline. I kind of know where it's going to go. I've got the skills to talk to you. I've got the skills to record it, to get it up online. Still figuring out how this all fits together. Now think about that with what you're trying to start. And this could be going to the gym. This could be a new diet. This could be a new relationship. It could be a new business venture. You're still figuring out how it works. Because that well-worn groove that I talked about, what we were doing previously, even if we didn't mean for it to become a well-worn groove, didn't mean for it to become a system, it is. For some people, that well-worn groove, it's a bad habit. Smoking, drinking, sitting on a couch, not doing the work that we said that we're going to do, not writing the book that we promised ourselves that we'd write this year. That's your groove. And we're always fighting the well-worn groove. Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it doesn't. But let's get back to that character development. New podcast, new book, new diet, exercise, anything that you're trying to do this year, the only way to take that to the next level is by jumping in and actually doing it. I had no idea what Red 2.0 was going to be about until I jumped in, until I started doing these solo episodes, until I started working with the new format, seeing the problems that came up. You can't predict these things. So often you see people worrying about little things that could go wrong. Most of the time, those don't happen. The things that go wrong are the things that we had no idea about because we were looking from the outside. The only way to really know what's going to go wrong is to jump in, experience those things for yourself. Any transition that you do in your life, whether it be business or personal, it's going to take some time. New things take time. You've got to get out of that old groove, jump in, and form the new one. Cut by cut, it takes a little bit of time, and there will be discomfort because it's doing something that you're not used to doing. I've been doing yoga. The style I do is called Iyengar. I've done it since 1998. For the last 15 years, I've been doing yoga daily. And when I say daily, I mean daily. I've only missed 2 days in the last 15 years. And here's the thing that I've learned from yoga that applies to everything that we try to do, whether it's new or whether we try to change something that's already existing. When you go to yoga, they're going to look at your posture and your alignment, and you're going to think that you're sitting up straight. You're going to think that you're standing straight. It feels normal to you to do what you're doing because you're in that well-worn groove. Almost all of the time, you're going to have some problems. Your body's over to the right, your body's over to the left. You're standing over to one side or the other, leaning into one hip. Think about that the next time you stand up. These are things that you don't think about because they feel normal to you. But they're misalignments, and we all have those in our lives. And to get to the correct alignment, because you're so used to the old alignment, even though it's better for you, even though it's more efficient, it's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're not used to it. All transitions take time. I talked to a guy a few months ago. He was getting married. He was a 20-something guy living with his parents, and his fiance also living with her parents. These two were getting ready to get married, never lived out on their own. You think that's going to be a transition? Sure, you could look at it and say, yeah, they're living with people. They know how to do laundry. They know how to cook. They know a few of the skills that they're going to need. But the transition, completely unlike anything that they could be prepared for. Years ago, before I was self-employed, I remember starting a new job and being completely exhausted by the end of the day. No energy. Came home from work. It seemed like all that I could do was sit there, barely keep my eyes open. I was completely exhausted. But a couple of weeks into it, my stamina increased. I would come home from work, and I was back to my normal level of energy. That happened when I started in radio. I would script out everything, the intros, the outros. I had all the questions in advance. I knew exactly what I was going to do to fill an hour of time on my syndicated talk show. These days, it's a whole lot easier. I could pretty much, if I wanted to, go in with one question, a starting question, and just listen and play off what the guest is giving me back. We could go from there, fill an hour, done. It's a whole lot easier. I'm a whole lot more efficient. And that's going to come with Red 2.0. It's going to be a whole lot easier for me to fill this time with you. Just me talking, no guest, no music, no co-host. But I'm not there yet. But I know that it's going to come. Same for you. The book you're trying to write, the new habit that you're trying to get in place, it will get easier, but you have to stick with it. Here's a great example. This one's specifically about podcasts, but it applies to everything. There's a statistic, 90% of new podcasts, they last 7 episodes or fewer. 90%, they just fade away, done. 7 or less. You can go on iTunes, you'll see this. But if you can last 8 episodes, just 8 episodes, you've got that habit in place, there's a good chance that you're going to keep going. Maybe like Red Podcast, this is episode number 160. We've been around for about a year at this point. There's some podcasts, hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and all you've got to do, statistically, to get to this level, hit number 8. You've got that well-worn groove established, and you're good to go. Now, it might not be perfect. It might be a little bit rough, just like this Red Podcast 2.0 transition, but you're not going to quit. By the way, the transition, it really hasn't been that rough. I haven't done 2 episodes a week like I wanted to, but in the last 4 weeks, we've done 7 episodes. Some people would think that's a ton. Man, I wish I could do that many. I'm just trying to do 1 a week. Well, I wanted to do 2 a week. It's still not where I want it to be, but the point remains the same. Sometimes we don't live up to our initial goals. But here's the question. How could we if we're not in the game, playing the game, doing exactly what it is that we say that we want to do? Without that, we've got no idea. Jumping in is the only way. So let's talk about how to recover, because that's what this episode is about, how to recover, how to get back on track. One way, if you've completely fallen off the wagon, simply do what I call a relaunch, a brand new beginning. Take everything that you've learned from your first attempt and start all over again. Bankruptcy, debt forgiveness. This works not just for money, but for anything. Sometimes people will do what they call email bankruptcy. Take the 1,000 messages that are in your inbox, or if you're somebody like me, I think I've got about 3,500 messages in there. Select all, hit delete, done. Start from scratch. I've certainly done this with the desktop on my computer. It gets so messy because I store so many files there. Take all the files, put them in a folder, 2015, 2016, 2017 desktop, whatever the name of it is. Dump them all in there. Start from scratch. This is one way to start all over again. You take what you've learned from jumping in, and hopefully you don't make those same mistakes again. People understand starting over. If you're divorced, you know somebody who's been divorced, if you've ever had a breakup, that's starting over. I know one guy, he started over with his marriage 7 times. He's now working on his 8th marriage. Now, here's the problem with that. Sooner or later, people start becoming skeptical, and this is one of those things in business, and this is why you should attempt to keep pressing forward even if it's not perfect. When you walk away and then come back to something, and walk away and then come back to something, or keep changing your mind, people lose faith in you. People lose faith in you. That's not to say that you shouldn't do those things, but you're going to lose a few people along the way. But my reason for bringing up this point is not that you're going to lose a few people. It's to make you ask yourself, is this something that you really want? My buddy's on his 8th marriage. He started over 7 times. Here's what I'd ask him, and I have asked him this. Do you really want this? Do you really want to be married? Because there's one part of you, your mouth, that's telling me that you do. But there's another part of you, your actions, you keep screwing this thing up, man. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's not these women you're hanging out with. Maybe it's you, even if it's simply picking women that aren't good matches for you. So think about that. If you're going to relaunch, there's an opportunity for a new beginning, and you can do that as many times as you want to. But once you get to a certain number of times, you have to ask yourself, is this what I really want? And there's no harm in walking away. Plenty of guys are single. I didn't get married till I was 41. I've started businesses. I've run businesses into the ground. I've started new businesses. But learn from jumping in and don't keep making the same mistake and repeating the same behavior again and again. So here's my plan for Red Podcast. This is a plan that you can use yourself if you're ready to get back on track. One of the things that you can do, people have mixed feelings about this. I'm going to do it, though, right here on this episode, is to announce what your plan is. My plan, 2 episodes a week from now on. If you're a fan of Red Podcast, you've gone to iTunes and subscribed, and you're not seeing those 2 episodes come down your stream every week, feel free to tweet me. @DavidHooper is my username. Announcing your plan and holding yourself accountable to people can help you to be accountable to yourself. Part 2 of this is planning in advance. This was something that I dropped during the transition. I mentioned that we were in a well-worn groove, and one of those grooves was how I scheduled Red Podcast, how I planned shows in advance, how we recorded them, and how everything was edited and distributed. But with the new version of Red Podcast, because it was just me, things were easier for me to schedule, and because I had more control, I completely dropped the planning because I didn't have to share that information with anybody else. That was a mistake. You cannot consistently do things at the last minute and expect to be consistently successful. So plan what you want to do in advance. Third part, get past the hard part. 8 episodes. If you can get past the first 7 episodes on a podcast, chances are you're going to be able to stick it out. If you can get past the first 40 days of a habit, going to the gym, stick it out. I mentioned doing yoga for the last 15 years, missing only 2 days. And how did that happen? 40 days, I found, is how long it takes for me to establish a new habit. If you're not familiar with this program, there's a program on iPhone, an app. It's called Goal Streaks. I'll link it from the show notes, redpodcast.com/160 for those. If you can hit something 40 days in a row, I found it's easier to continue. Certainly 15 years of yoga, only missing 2 days is testament to that. Let me tell you why I missed those 2 days. Once, I was flying internationally, simply lost a day while traveling around the globe. The other was due to some medical stuff. I had a tooth extraction, simply was incapacitated, not able to do yoga like I wanted to. So good excuse is not to say that you can never miss a day when you're starting a new habit. But if you want to have a habit that's that solid, 40 days is all it takes. Check out the Goal Streaks program. Again, I'll have that linked at redpodcast.com/160. The big point, get past the hard part. For me, it's actually getting into the studio. I built a studio in my house. Unless I'm recording, I'm not in it. So I've got to actually get in the studio, fire up the recording equipment, and start talking. Once I do that, it's easy. But actually walking in the studio, turning everything on, that's the toughest part. Once heard a quote, it said, writing a book is easy. It's sitting down to write. That's the difficult part. So the question for you, what is your first step? That may be all it takes. All it takes for you to get going, that first step, then you'll continue 2, 3, 4, the other parts of the process that you need to get going on. You can find that one domino that needs to fall. The rest of the dominoes will take care of themselves. Coming up next on Red, I've got a 2-part series. It's how to be a better public speaker. I've talked to dozens of public speakers. I've been doing a lot of public speaking myself, had the conversation many times, and still I heard some great tips from these guys that I hadn't heard elsewhere. They're really going to help you if you've got a message that you want to spread, and you want to do that by being in front of a group and delivering a great presentation. It's a 2-parter. That's coming up, episodes 161 and 162 of Red Podcast. If you've got questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. The best way to get me, Twitter, @DavidHooper is my username. And while you're online, go to redpodcast.com, join the Red Insiders. This is a group of influencers that I put together. You'll be connected with other bloggers, podcasters, speakers, marketers, people with messages to spread. We get on the phone every month. I'll talk with you one-on-one about your business, help you grow it, help you spread your message, help you to make more money. Again, that's free. It's called Red Insiders. It's available at redpodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening. Feel free to reach out. If you like Red Podcast, you like what I'm doing here, tell a friend. That's going to help me spread the message and get this information out there. I'll see you next time on the next episode of the Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.